This is Phil Kessel and John Scott, and these two are complete polar opposites of each other as hockey players. Phil Kessel is the Leafs franchise superstar, and at the time, one of the most elite shooters in the game. He's clocking in at 5'11" and a slim 208 pounds. The other side is a 6'9" John Scott, who is one of the more feared enforcers in the league due to his sheer size. So naturally, in a random preseason game that means absolutely nothing, these two players are about to create complete chaos. It's September 22nd, 2013. For the first time in over a calendar year, the NHL was going to have a full season. After the lockout created the 48-game shortened schedule the year prior, the NHL was finally back to its normal schedule to start the 2013-2014 season. This meant the return of preseason games, and for the most part, these games mean absolutely nothing other than for a coach to test out some systems, evaluate a few players, and allow for everyone to get up to game speed. This game was nothing different. Just two teams with a couple of stars in the lineup and a few players fighting for their job. Now, coming into this season, the Toronto Maple Leafs made some big moves. They made a big splash in free agency, signing David Clarkson to a monster deal, and they also added Stanley Cup champ David Bolin and goaltender Jonathan Bernier. A big splash was needed for this team because the last time they were on the ice in a meaningful game, they blew a 4-1 lead in a Game 7 to the Boston Bruins. There was a bitter taste coming into this season, but fans were still excited for the new guys despite some ugly long-term contracts that I'm sure won't come back to bite them anytime soon. On the other side is the Buffalo Sabres, who just simply aren't very good. After finishing 22nd in the NHL the previous year, the Sabres are a team on the decline. With aging stars like Ryan Miller and Thomas Vanek, the Sabres are in the early stages of a future rebuild. In this preseason game, there were some stars in the lineup for both teams. The Leafs had their superstar Phil Kessel in the lineup, along with newcomers David Clarkson and Jonathan Bernier, while the Sabres decided to start their franchise goaltender in Ryan Miller. From the start, the Leafs looked like the better team. Phil Kessel got on the board twice for the Leafs, and heading into the third period, the Leafs were up 4-1 yet again. But even though this is a preseason game, the habits of this Leafs team started to show, and they allowed Buffalo to score 2 goals to pull the game within 1. Now, for a preseason game, this had its fair share of physicality. There was a fight early on, and a lot of after the whistle stuff between guys trying to make the roster. So, after Buffalo got their third goal to cut the lead to 1, Corey Tropp of the Sabres and Jamie Devane of the Leafs would drop the gloves. However, Devane would catch Tropp with a left and would leave him needing assistance from the Sabres staff after going down hard. This is when the game took a complete 180. After the Tropp injury, that would draw the attention of Sabres tough guy John Scott. Scott had words with Randy Carlyle after the injury and warned him that he'd beat up whomever Carlyle sent out next. So to be cheeky, Randy Carlyle sent out his first line with Phil Kessel, lining up right next to John Scott. Surely, John Scott wouldn't jump Phil Kessel of all guys in a preseason game. But as the two line up side by side, Scott doubled down and apparently gave Kessel a heads up that he was going to jump him. In pure shock, Kessel just replied, "What?" And then pure chaos ensued. Scott jumps Kessel, Kessel backs up right away and gives him a 2-hand chop right to the leg. 2 Leaf players jump in right away and grab Scott to get his attention, and as Scott is turned away, Phil decides he's going to take one more chop at the tree that is John Scott and gives him another 2-hand whack right to the leg. At this point, everyone jumps in and grabs a guy. There's fights going on all over the place, but the ultimate winner here is Brian Flynn. And if you don't know who that is, he's the guy who got his ass kicked by Phil Kessel, but no one remembers because Kessel gave out 2 of the most legendary slashes in hockey history. As everything starts to settle down, the boys are laughing with Phil. They can't believe they just saw him get into a fight and actually win, but let's pause it on this shot right here. Because in all of this chaos, do you notice something just a little bit off? There's more Leafs on the ice than there are Sabres. How exactly did that happen? Well, if you go back to Kessel's second chop right here, you'll see a Leaf hop on the ice from the bench. That guy right there is the new Leaf signing David Clarkson. Born and raised in Toronto, Clarkson wanted to endear himself to his teammates and the fan base by protecting his star player. That's quite noble, but the only issue is that hopping off the bench during a scrum is an automatic 10-game suspension. Clarkson never did get settled in after that 10-game suspension, and his career took a complete nosedive after only 2 years in Toronto. Anyways, as things are about to die down, Both goalies decide they want a piece of the action, and we get a full-blown goalie fight between the new Leaf Jonathan Bernier and franchise goaltender Ryan Miller. The goalie fight would last over a minute, and once the dust settled, the end saw a result of a grand total of 239 penalty minutes handed out. Toronto would hold on to the lead for once, and Phil Kessel would be suspended for the remainder of the preseason for his 2 notorious whacks. Afterwards, John Scott put the blame on Leafs head coach Randy Carlyle for not putting out a player to answer the bell for the Leafs. Scott called Carlyle's bluff and decided to jump Kessel anyways. Funny enough, these two guys would have drastically different careers, but successful in their own ways. John Scott must have made enough of an impression that night because Buffalo decided to keep him around, and he played a career-high 56 games for the Sabres that season. A few years later, he was the center of more controversy as the league tried to block his appearance at the All-Star game after being voted in by the fans. After that backfired in the league's face, he would go on to win MVP of that All-Star game and ended up becoming a feel-good story for the NHL. Phil Kessel, on the other hand, is a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, despite all the critics that he's had over the years. What was supposed to be another boring preseason game at the end of September would end in complete chaos due to these two drastically different players. Now, I highly doubt we see anything like this in a 2023 preseason game, as hockey has changed a lot since 2013, but sometimes all it takes is for a superstar to get jumped, and the result is pure chaos.